Okay, so now that you have seen Ryozen in action, a few thoughts here at the end after having played it. First thought that I really like is, although there is some take that, because that's going to be the piece of contention for people in this game, when you can use your archer or your fighter to uncloak or even boot a person out of a spot, they aren't lost. You aren't penalized. In fact, you actually have the ability to gain victory points when that happens. Now, you may lose from the area that they get booted from, which is why you would potentially even consider doing that in the first place. But it's very strategic. It's very few and far between, but it can be a little bit cutthroat if you are a person that wants to do that. But getting put in the center, in the Phoenix Tower, is not a bad thing. It's not. It gets you victory points, which are very helpful. So it sort of reminds me, a la Champions of Midgard, like I mentioned at the beginning, the Valhalla-esque experience, where the big problem with Champions of Midgard at the beginning of that just base game was that if you lost a battle, well, you just kind of got SOL. But with the Valhalla expansion, you were rewarded in glorious victory via loss, if you will, so that it evened it out, so that, you know, the runaway leader wasn't the one who just rolled lucky on the battle and just never had a bad battle that they lost. You can still win and catch up if you lose one. And that's what that mechanism reminds me of and why I like it. Now, the other aspect of things is, as you saw in the video, or maybe you didn't, maybe you're just skipping to this part, there are a number of asymmetric workers that you have. And the biggest problem with that is you just don't pull the right worker out. Sometimes you will get a worker like you saw, like the merchant, that just has a really good ability that you feel is slightly more powerful. And so I guess that's how you need to approach the game, in the sense that if you get the archer, if you get one of those other ones that are more take that right away, well, you better pivot and change your game flow and your strategy. And if you don't, well, yeah, then it's going to feel unfair and then you're not going to like it as much. But you have to take what's given to you with those workers. And it's sort of like a deck of cards, in the sense that you're going to draw a couple off the top, and if you don't get the one you want, well, you may be a little SOL. At the same time, you may just have to go with what's there and change your strategy. And how easy for you is that? I tend to find myself in these games pigeonholing myself, which is why I tend to not be very good at them in general. And if you're a pigeonholer like me, shut up, Ignite, then maybe it's something to consider. Do I think the tower needs to be there? No. I mean, I think on a table, I mean, it just needs to be smaller. Like, you can see I didn't even put mine up during the playthrough because I wanted you to have the overhead. But, I mean, it's sort of, for me, like the Everdell experience. I think the Everdell tree is a complete, you know, give me $10 off the price of the game in the first place. That's me. And that's, I mean, I know people like that from a deluxe side of things when we're talking about this. But for me, it was meh. And I'm assuming, you know, that some of this will be deluxifications on the actual pledge itself, with the moon shards and the things like that. I mean, that's what I would expect from a Euro game, right? Deluxifications, not necessarily as much gameplay content. But I don't know what they're going to be doing either way. So, I mean, if you're watching this and you go, okay, well, he's not a worker placement person, so why should I listen to anything he says on this? Well, because maybe then this will change your thoughts on things. Is a worker placement game good if it can't attract non-worker placement people? I mean, there are things I like about worker placements. There are worker placement games that I like more than others, and I would say that those are ultimately the more successful games, because when you look at games across the board, you look at games that have a wide audience that are more successful, that are ultimately also just really thought of as solid games. Whether or not they're right for you is a whole other issue. But that's what I look at, is this, and that's why I use that comparison at the beginning of Champions of Midgard and Lords of Waterdeep, because those are, when people talk about recommending intro worker placement games, you know, the three I see most often mentioned: Lords of Waterdeep, Champions of Midgard, and Everdell. Why? Not because they are the absolute bee's knees of worker placements, but because they provide a very entertaining, a very solid, a very thorough experience into the mechanism and the genre. And this is not going for a weight on Board Game Geek of 3 or 4, whatever that even means. of super crunchy euros. I don't even know what that means. But this has enough variability. It has enough in the 6 locations, and it has enough of those cards. Speaking of those cards, we'll talk about those in a second, as I reminded myself of them, that it's going to be different every time, and you're going to have a different strategy, and you're going to have to adapt. Because those cards that I played, going into those for a second, those cards will also make a heavy use of your strategy. Like, the first time I played this, I had a card that allowed me to take the nighttime reward instead of the daytime. So rounds 2 and 3, like I got that in round 1. So rounds 2 and 3, I was just rolling on the secondary side of things in the terms of the nighttime power, nighttime power, nighttime power. And this time, completely different. I like that. There are some cool things in there that allow you to adapt different strategies. And I felt that if you're a worker placement and you're going, you know, I only played this at the 2-player count, so I can't speak to the 3 or 4. But just looking and having looked at the board itself, I can tell you that, especially on the 2-player side, if you watch the gameplay through as well, it was not being able to place wherever I want, however I want, and get whatever I want. There was some real, you know, tightness in saying, okay, well, I'm going to have to go here because there's not a better place for me to go, and because there is no other place for me to go that's even going to be closely as beneficial. So I like that aspect too, because I think the other criticism of these games, you know, and sort of even with Everdell, it's a little bit looser, you know, Everdell is overall. Part of the fun of these games is that you have to choose wisely. And this game does make you choose wisely, but it does so by using those cards, using your workers that are going to be different, and then making you base your strategy off of that, rather than having more of, I'm going to pick this strategy and go with it. If you want I'm going to pick this strategy and go with it, you're probably better off with heavier versions of Euros. But if you want something that focuses on the tactical nature along with the strategic nature and flows very smoothly with this sort of setting, I think this game is actually going to surprise people and be better than they expected. This was, comparison-wise, you know, in terms of the other games I've played like this was probably easier for me to understand, to flow game-wise, to make decisions than the other worker placement game I played earlier, Collab. Collab was doing something completely different, but I thought the decisions on Collab were harder because of the tableau aspect, but because of the limited 3 different sort of suits that you had of them. And I didn't think they were necessarily, I don't know. I thought that the 3 of the Collab, they didn't synergize nearly as well for me. Like, you went strong on one of them or the other, and you weren't necessarily forced to adapt as much. And I like being forced to adapt, and I liked this a little bit more overall. If I had to pick one for me personally, because of the adaptation tactical nature, the strategic was definitely heavier on Collab. And so again, what are you looking for in a game like this? If that helps comparison-wise for recency. So what do I think? I mean, I think if you're looking for can I play this sort of game with people who are not familiar with board games, it is a little step up from Champions and Lords of Waterdeep, but it is not overwhelming that I would feel uncomfortable trying to explain this, because it is still very intuitive. And that's what I would say about both this and Collab. Both very intuitive, explaining wise, but flow wise, they're still offering a different experience. That's, I would say Collab is still going to be a little bit harder for people, and this is going to be a little bit easier in terms of understanding when you're actually playing, rather than understanding just up here. Because I understand both of them very well up here, but the ability to apply this to the table is easier on Ryozen. There you go. Those are my thoughts. Ryozen, check it out if you're interested. Tabula Games, launching on crowdfunding soon. Let me know, as always, if you have any questions, comments below. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. I'm sorry, Ignite. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. See you around.